Hi, there you are. Okay, awesome. How you doing, my primo?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. I wasn't sure if you could hear me properly, so I'm in a part of the house that is perfectly clear.
Yeah, no, you sound fantastic, and got you popping hard. We be popping.
Cool.
Awesome. So, as it's very interesting as your cousin on one hand and being your prima, and then seeing your Vita, and that was beyond what I had even known about you. And I'm like, that's my blood. This is so awesome.
I guess there's a lot of things we don't know about each other until it's necessary to know. Because everybody's so busy nowadays that we just assume people are doing well, so we don't worry. So thank God that we're doing well.
Right. And then, but on the flip side, like you said, on a day to day, they don't necessarily know what you know and to what extent and what your work is. It's kind of like when you would take your kid to school day, you know,
Mhm.
you take your nephew or your niece to school day.
Right.
What do you want to be when you grow up? People
And
work,
things change, and
and
things
things
change.
and things change, and you don't know what. You don't even know anymore. And even now
No.
today, you don't even know. I mean, what struck me was your progression of how you have specifically ascended and been able to move into different fields. That's what struck me so much. You're very much of a chameleon, and to be able to have that breath is
Well,
formidable.
yeah, but
That's the
you know
best
what?
word I
I
can
think
think of.
I think that you and I come from the same stock. So there's a word that doesn't exist in our vocabulary, and that's fear. And and I think that's where a lot of people fail because they're afraid to go into the unknown. Where I think you and I look forward to the unknown, and it's a challenge. So let's go do it.
I just, can you please give us the 30-second, because I know I couldn't do you justice, but you got to really please, give me your accolades.
Okay. Well, here's a very simple 30-second run on what I've accomplished and what I've done. I have a degree in chemical engineering from New Jersey Institute of Technology. From there, I moved into various industries with that degree that gave me the opportunity to. I have worked extensively in the United States, in Europe, in Central South America, the Caribbean, and even ran 24 airports in Mexico, where I think I really did a great job, and I love the people from Mexico. I think that they're incredible. I disagree tremendously with their form of government because although they consider themselves a democracy, it's a very socialist country. On the field of politics, I've really enjoyed being a Republican for many years. Actually, I think I became a Republican when I was a little kid in the fourth grade when Richard Nixon was being elected president. I think my uncles and at the time, because my dad was still in a jail in Cuba for being against the government, the communist government, kind of formed me that way to believe in the Republican concept of you make money, and you help other people. So I've done a lot of things, including being the treasurer of the Los Angeles County Republican Party. As you know, I've been on many television shows, CNN Latino, Fox News. The last 4 years, I've been on television on election night, and I'm glad to say that in 2016, I was spot on. I was the only one at the beginning of the night, and by 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, I said to the world, Donald Trump's going to be our next president. And even at that time, people were saying, "You're crazy." I said, "No, he is," and thank God he is.
Amen,
So,
amen, amen. And with that, John Goya, a direct descendant to one of the most amazing and impressive artisans in the 18th and 19th century. You want to talk about your descendant real quick?
Well, yeah, I think that runs in my blood. That's why I think I'm so intensive in politics, because Francisco Goya was, I'm a descendant of the artist. And I think that that's something that we have to be very proud of, because even back then with his art, he voiced his disagreement with a totalitarian government. And I think that we have to continue that, and make sure that the Democrats, socialists, communists that are now in control of the Democratic Party, our voices are heard. Can't do it through painting, but we can do it through radio, like you.
You're absolutely 100% right. And that is just such a testament as far as to where you really have come from your genetics and your roots. And that's an interesting segue into what's happening today. We have a Biden Harris ticket, or a Harris Biden ticket, whoever you talk to. And the idea of race and reparations. So we're just talking about where your genetic artisan of a family member did what he did, and through communism and socialism and attempting to keep a voice. As of Friday, there was an injunction stating that the Grace Cathedral Church in Los Angeles would be able to have parishioners inside. And as of Saturday, it already had went to the appeals level, and that they rescinded that because they knew that on Sunday they were going to be holding inside and interior services. So now they have to go back outside. And this really just brings us back to what is going on with our republic and our country, and where are we, and what century are we living in?
Well, that's an awesome question that you're asking. And when you think of Kamala Harris, the senator from the awful state of California, because this one's gone from the sunshine golden state to really a dictatorial form of government.
I call it the communist of California. Yes.
Yeah.
I've actually had to relocate. I've always been in California, and now I've left California.
I know, and I'm going to follow you in 5 years, hopefully 4. Unless things change.
On the East Coast and finding a red state. Perhaps South Carolina is where I'm going to end up putting a flag as well.
Yeah, I have to tell you, my niece-in-law is dating because you brought this up. I was going to give you a real quick. My niece-in-law is dating a manager with a moving company, and they rent out these trucks. And in California, if you rent a truck to move to another state, anywhere, even Nevada, the cost of renting a large truck is in the thousands of dollars, because it's going to take 5 to 7 years to get that truck back.
Astronomical.
But if you rent a truck in Texas to come to California, they're almost paying you to do it.
Absolutely. Pennies.
Anyway, so just real quick on going back to the church, I think that's so important. When you have the vice presidential candidate for the Socialist Democratic Party of the United States state that she believes that Catholics and Christians should never be allowed to run for office, especially Catholics, because they are anti-abortion and pro-life. And this is something that Kamala Harris has said openly in forums. And what else can you expect from the government of California is to prevent people from going to church, especially Catholic churches, because they consider the church non-government. So because God gives us our rights, they don't want that. They want the state to give us our rights. So if you take away the church, then you take everything away. And I have to tell you that I'm very disappointed, because I think that we as Catholics or Christians, we should be out there in massive demonstrations. And
I think that what you're saying is very, very profound, because here we are actually talking on a Sunday, and what has been put out by the Catholic diocese and the different dioceses is to have a protest and actually hold service today on Sunday inside. So we'll see how many churches that ends up happening. But what you're saying is we're entering into a civil war.
We are entering a civil war, but you know what? It could take a few of us. I'm very proud of of the people of Brooklyn, New York, and I'll tell you why. When these riots started in New York, it has devastated the whole city of New York.
I've been personally in New York all week. It's in last week is just it was horrifying to see what it looks like. It looks like a third world country going down
yeah,
Canal Street.
yeah, and people are moving out of New York City into droves. I mean, I understand that before to get an apartment in New York was almost impossible. The amount of people now leaving, there's a 68% occupancy availability, which is as you know, I'm from that part of the country for 30 years. That was, even when I was a young man, it was impossible to get an apartment anywhere in New York. Now they say you can get it anywhere. But going back to what the people of Brooklyn, New York are doing, the one guy who is the head and the chairman of the Zambo, which is a martial art Association of America, he got together 65 men and women, and they went against the rioters in Brooklyn, and they actually stopped them. There were 65 of them. There was over 1,000 of the rioters. 65 people stopped them. The next day, they had over 500 people come out. By the third day, they had 1,000 people. The riots in Brooklyn stopped, and now those people have formed an organization, and that organization in less than 3 weeks has over 500,000 people.
That is, I mean, you're breaking news right now because I haven't seen or heard that publicized anywhere. And interestingly enough, what you're here saying is really the people arising and protecting themselves and their own.
And you have to. And that's because they know that the president has said that he will do whatever it needs to do to stop this looting. And although the mayor has shut down Manhattan, he can't shut down all the boroughs. So if any of your listeners want to go to www.u/usa.org, that organization is the police organization, the martial arts organization, and the people of New York. And they have over 500,000 people that have signed up and are actively involved in voter registration, which is so important. And one of the things they're saying is they need to go vote. Because, when you look at some of these elections, I'll give you a perfect example. Here and you know this, in Orange County. Mm-hmm. In Orange County in 2018, the gentleman who was running for governor, who was an unknown in the Republican ticket, won Orange County by 350,000 votes. Now, Newsom won the state, so they didn't care about it. But everybody else that was running for Congress in that area in Orange County, on the night of the election, because I was on television that night, and I'm saying, all right, everybody's going back to Congress, except one guy, which we knew he was going to lose, but everybody else was going to go back to Congress. At the end of the count, 3 weeks later, they had found boxes of mail-in ballots, and all the Republicans lost. But yet, the Republican unknown for governor won by 350,000 votes. If you divide those votes, those Congress people should never have lost.
Absolutely. And now we're facing having an opportunity of complete mail-in votes. I mean, what century are we living in now that we're in the technology that we can move mass amounts of fortunes digitally, and we're voting and using the U.S. Postal Service as our voting tabulators? And
yeah, that's crazy, because you have congressional elections in where you are now in New York City, that the elections happened a month ago. And you have these two elections that you can't figure out who won, because it's all mail-in ballots, and because the Democrats haven't won the ones that they want, they can't figure out who's winning. And we know for a fact that in New York City, over 20% of the mail-in ballots were said invalid. Invalid. I'll give you a real quick scenario, a personal experience that happened to me in the last election. I went to vote in our last election here in California in the primary. And I got my mail-in ballot, which I didn't ask for. So I said, I'm not going to use this. I'm going to go and vote. When I arrived at the post to vote, they took my mail-in ballot and they scanned it so they could give me a regular ballot. Well, when they scanned it, they said to me, "Mr. Goya, this is no good. This is a fake ballot." And the person behind the counter checking us in said, "It's a good thing you came, because had you mailed this, they would have never opened it. They would have thrown it away." So here's a person like myself, who is an American citizen, who has voted in every election since I was 18 years old. I have never missed an election, whether I've lived in New Jersey, New York, Tennessee, Mexico. In fact, when I lived in Mexico, I flew back to the United States to vote in a presidential election. I just came back to vote because I think that is so important.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and they would have thrown my ballot away, because when they scanned it, they said it was a fake ballot.
Once again, this is breaking news. I mean, what you're saying, you don't hear anywhere on the mainstream news. You know, obviously there are other amazing reporters that are just really just fighting the fight and consistently showing how between the Democrat and the Republican, if it's a Republican, it's thrown under the blanket, so to speak, or thrown under, you know. However, if it's a Democrat situation, you know, it's this is upside down day. It's
well, you're going to be the first one reporting out there on what's going on in Brooklyn, because I can tell you, I listen to the news all the time. While I'm working, I've got the news going on, and I have not heard. Had I not have a friend in Brooklyn, New York, because I got buddies everywhere, I never would have found out about what was going on in Brooklyn, because the media does not, you know, the media doesn't show it. So you're 100% correct. So with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, because everybody knows that Joe Biden is being directed through the nose what to do.
Man, he needs to go. I mean, God bless him, but he needs. That man has his mental cognitivity. I mean, between that, you and I, knowing people that have had dementia and Alzheimer's issues, that, you know, even as lay people, his last statements in regards to, let me get this right, requesting a mandate, a martial law, basically, to require every single person to be wearing face masks for the next 3 to 4 months, that will save at least 30 to 40,000 lives. And as slow as he read all that, it was as if he was being taught to reread for the very first time.
Correct. And you know what? There are studies out there that actually, to be exact, there are 53 studies out there from universities, from colleges, from massive medical organizations in the United States and all over the world, Japan, Europe, that state that this should not be a pandemic, because there is not a vaccine as we know it right now, except for the one in Russia, which I would never take. But we know that there are ways to cure this, like we cure the flu. And the other thing is, we know that countries that have worn masks, even in the United States, where we're wearing masks constantly now, it's not the cure. It doesn't stop it. So all the studies, including the CDC and Fauci's documents up to May of this year, was the mask was worthless, that the mask doesn't do anything. The mask can help you maybe not give it to somebody else if you're very close to them, but the reality is that all the studies from all medicine, including the CDC, up until May of this year, was that a mask, unless you're in a medical environment, does not work.
Well, you're absolutely talking about no data. I mean, or the data isn't there to support it. The data that we're seeing, and you being in, interestingly enough, I do want to go ahead and iterate that what we're talking about masks, you happen to know something about masks, and you know, working with what they call as PPE. Can you go ahead and even talk about even people that are walking around with masks that they think that they're being protected, but the counterfeit and the quality of the masks and what they're doing?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of counterfeit out there, And as the medical studies that anybody could look up on the web, even go into the CDC, like I said before, they'll tell you that this does not work. It works in a medical environment because you change the mask constantly. When you have a mask on that you constantly put on, especially when I go out to walk my dog in the park and I see these people running with masks on, I just want to go over and pull them away from them, because I'm saying you're exhaling all the bad stuff out of your lungs and you're putting it into your mask and you're bringing it right back in. So you're actually poisoning yourself. So when you're in a hospital environment, you're constantly changing the mask, you're preventing from bringing all that stuff back. Even if you look at a surgical operation, the nurses, the doctors as they're doing surgery for hours, they're constantly changing the mask of the doctor and the nurses because they know that that's not good. And there's so much counterfeit. I mean, part of what I do outside of politics is I work in a major company, and we've had major problems with some of the supplies because they've been counterfeit, because they know that it doesn't really work. So, let's get something out there. So when you look at it, just a face covering, it can help if you're right up to a person, but if you touch them, you can catch it. We need to do herd immunity. Look, a good example in the part of the country you live in. New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, they have massive amounts of deaths. Of course, their deaths, 50% of them, because the government put sick people in nursing homes, which, of course, devastated the elderly. But because you had such an enormous amount of people herd immunity, then what happens? People stop getting the disease. The other thing that we're not looking at, too, is that when you have herd immunity, it also prevents other possible contaminations down the road, because the coronavirus, this is number 19. So it's well documented that if you've had another coronavirus, your immune system is probably ready to fight it. And we know that a huge percentage of people get this and don't even know they have it.
And those are the people that are the walking asymptomatic.
Correct.
And where you're talking about a herd immunity situation, during the 1918 flu, they brought everyone and everything and all the furniture outside and put it in the sun.
Yeah.
And
that's
now
right.
And now we're looking at Sweden. Sweden didn't take a step. They talked to their country as a people, but they didn't shut down their economy. They didn't actually forcibly shut down anyone. And now, from the 15 days to stop the spread, here we are in month 5 going into 6?
Yep. And it hasn't worked. So, you know what? Keep everybody at home. Keep, shelter. Well, guess what? Now people are going out because they're getting, to the point where they can't do it. The very ill have mostly died. I know we still have, some deaths coming because of elderly people that have, secondary conditions, or even younger people that have secondary conditions that, and I'm not even sure about the numbers. I'll give you a personal life experience that happened to us here in California. I have good friends that worked on a campaign, because I ran for assembly here in California, and I've kept very close touch with some of the people that worked on my campaign. And the husband of one of the ladies that worked on my campaign had a heart condition, petrified of going to the hospital because of the pandemic. And, you're going to catch this if you go to the hospital. So he was having symptoms. He did this telemedicine, which I think is a waste of time, because we don't have the technology really to do telemedicine yet. I mean, we have it if you're in a hospital to a hospital, but not from home to a doctor's office. And unfortunately, he passed away at night of a heart attack. Well, his wife called EMTs. They came, they took him. When she got the death certificate 9 days later, the first cause of death was COVID-19. And she immediately called the hospital and said, "Hey, wait a minute, my husband didn't die of COVID. He died of a heart attack. He never had COVID. He never left the house. When this thing started." And the response back from the administrator she finally got a hold of was, "Well, you told us he didn't come to the hospital because he was afraid of catching COVID. So that is the primary reason that he died, because he didn't come because of COVID. So Corvick was at the very top of his death certificate. And she said, no, he died of a heart attack. He had a heart condition for 25 years. That's what my husband died of. No, man, we can't change that because, you told us about Corvick. So if that happened to a person, I know how many more people out there are being Corvick deaths, and they're not having anything to do with this.
It's amazing what you're talking about, because I cannot even fathom that we're living in a country that would do this. I am just speechless at this point, truly. And here we are, we're having a conversation with John Goya. John, I do want to go ahead and segue from what we're talking about, saying a COVID, and these numbers. I mean, we have 350 million people in this country, and currently, tragically, 140,000, I believe now the deaths are, but 350 million to 140,000, if you're comparing it to other diseases and influenza, not to lessen anything, but haven't we kind of missed the mark?
Yeah, we have. And as you just said, and as President Trump says every day on TV, and he gets absolutely no credit for it, one death is too many. But when you look at what happened in 2009 and 2010, when the last administration, which was a Democratic administration, happened, we had something called H1N1, which literally closed down the country of Mexico for 30 days, by the way, because it was really a bad pandemic, and yet we barely heard anything about it. But when you look at the numbers of the number that caught the H1N1, it was 60,800,000 Americans in a year and a half caught the H1N1. If you look at the number of recordable deaths, and I guess back then they probably did it correctly, we had almost 60,000 Americans die of it. And yet you didn't see anything closed down. You didn't see planes stopping. So when you look at 60 million Americans that caught that pandemic, and yet nothing was said, nothing was done. And then you go back not so many years ago and you see people on MSNBC and you praying to God that before the end of Donald Trump's 4 years that we have a crash in our economy, and you have Dr. Fauci, who, by the way, I think he's a terrible, terrible clinician. And if I was president, I would replace him.
Has he? As far
I'm sorry?
He hasn't been right once, has he?
No, he hasn't been right at all. He hasn't been right at all. And he's one of these doctors that sits behind a desk. You know what? I would rather go see a doctor at Jackson Memorial or some of these other doctors around the country that are talking about how they're actually taking care of people than a guy who sits behind a desk for the last 40 years and has been CEO of some of these pharmaceutical companies that all of a sudden now are getting millions of dollars for vaccines. But to go back to your original question, we've had these pandemics. We've had these pandemics in the last 50 years, and we haven't closed down the country. We haven't closed down the world. This is and I hate conspiracies, but this is trying to be a one world government because President Donald Trump has actually put a knife in this whole world government. And he said, no, every country needs to be their own, and America needs to be who we are. We need to be proud of ourselves. So if you look at the number of real positive cases, because the other thing you have to remember is that there's a lot of people that go stand online in some of these states that have long lines in these cities, and they don't, because they have to wait an hour and a half because of the number or size of the population, and probably because they go to places that are convenient for them. I know of 4 people. I know specifically of 4 people that went and waited online, couldn't wait anymore, went home. 3 days later, got a call from the city health department saying, we want to let you know you tested positive for COVID-19. And all 4 of them said, yes, I signed the paperwork. But no, I never got the test because I had to wait over an hour and a half to take the test, so I had to go back to work. So if that happens with 4 people that John Goya knows, okay, how
Once
many more
again, this is your
people?
breaking news. This is breaking news.
How many more people? And I bet that if we took a census of the people that have waited and have left and have been COVID positive, who've never taken the test, how many are there? If you go into a hospital because the doctor sent you home with Tylenol and rest instead of sending you home with medication, and you get into a hospital and you're positive, and they test you 2 days later because they want to test you to see if you're no longer positive and have the antibodies, that second positive test, that's a new case. That's not
Interesting.
a retest. That's a new test. That's a new case. So I wonder how many people are really, how many cases we really have in the United States, how many deaths we really have in the United States, and like I said, one is too many. One death is too many.
Yeah,
Um,
what you're saying, and exactly to what the president has said, that one death is too many. However, working also in Hollywood and working on screenplays and science fiction, all of this is sounding beyond Orwellian of 1984, where every video has been changed and every book and everything has been changed and has been rewritten. And where you're here saying not getting into conspiracy theories, because obviously we want to be able to talk in facts, we want to be able to underscore what we're presenting to people. However, in
mhm,
this situation, it's really feeling very sinister. And
it is.
from Brooklyn having to protect their own to getting false positives and information that for a test that you've never taken, having death certificates being blared as far as COVID. We also know that it's significant if you're diagnosed with COVID or anywhere in COVID, it's immediately paid. The insurance companies are paying it, the federal government's paying for it. And it's a significant amount higher than if you went in and were diagnosed with influenza or with the flu.
Correct.
So, with that being said, and coming back to Sinister, our we have a republic, and that's what Benjamin Franklin said. Benjamin Franklin said, well, we have a republic. Said, I want to get this straight. The gentleman came up and walked up to Ben Franklin and said, "Thank you very much for placing our colonies together in for a democracy." And Benjamin Franklin stated, "Sir, you have a republic if you can keep it." So now this republic, if we can keep it, within a matter of days, we're going to be electing our new president. And we don't have a solid voting platform. It's plagued with communist activities. We are being kept inside and unable to congregate. What do you think? I mean, in this COVID world, what do we need to do to come together? Because we had a conversation, and I want you to opine on this. What do we need to do to come together? Because being overrun by a percentage of a few that are heavy-handing the many. This is what we've just been talking about, what our family members have went through in Cuba and in Italy and all around the world, and still today where we have slave trade and sex trade. What do we need to do?
Well, you know what? I'm going to tell you, as Mama Celeste would say, and as Mama Dolores would say, um, we need to go out and stop being afraid. And we need to go out to the polls and vote in mass. We need to go in person. We need to make sure that our voices are heard and that the fear goes away. Because if we stay at home, if we vote by mail, if we have the fear, we're going to end up. And I know that a lot of people, I've said this to you, and especially, some of the Latinos that I talk to, they say, oh, this is the United States, that can never happen. No, it can happen. Because look at Venezuela. 25 years ago, it was the fourth richest nation in the world. It produced oil, it produced gas. It was a nation where you would go and women were in high heels and women were in jewelry and gorgeous. And I always say, judge your nation by the way your women look. If your women look like crap, that nation is crap. If your women look fantastic, that nation is doing very well. Today, you go, and the last time I was in Venezuela was 7 years ago, and already then, the decline was huge because people feared, and even though there are millions of people in the streets today in Venezuela, once these monsters take over, they don't let go. They don't let go. And the women of America have to tell their sons, their husbands, their daughters, their mothers. The women of America have to tell Americans, go out and protect our nation. As Betsy Ross put that flag together, and all the women of America, Abigail Adams, that lived through the 1812 and were able to do what they did, and the great women of America uh, have made the major changes. I always say that if you look at our history, a woman put us on the moon because of her mathematical genius.
We did see a movie come out of Hollywood about that when they actually
Right,
made movies, and Kevin Costner, we would have a hat tip
correct.
for that, to actually show our value and what we have done.
There is a statue to Martin Luther King Jr. in Washington, which he was a great man, but really, who started this, the freedom of the real freedom of the Black Americans were women. Women have always been our backbone, and it's time that the women of America realize. And by the way, there's also a lot of bad women too out there. The socialist, communist women. A woman. They always give Fidel Castro the thing about he was the leader, but it was really a woman that was more evil than he was behind him. So we need the good conservative women of America, the good women of America, to go out and say, go out and fight for our freedom.
Part of that,
Because,
what you're talking about, fighting for the freedom, right now we're in the midst of having our children go back to school or not.
and I say, take them back to school. I say, put them in school. You know what? I remember 3 years ago, well, 4 years ago, because it was during Obama's administration, where we were letting everybody into this country. Here in California, I don't know if you remember, but in Riverside County, we had the bubonic plague in a public school, and it was mentioned once, and after that, school was closed. We had leprosy in another school here in Southern California. The school was closed. It was once on the news, and the rest of the time it was kept quiet. We know that COVID-19 does not affect children or young adults the way it does the elderly with chronic conditions. Yes,
What
we've
I
had a few deaths.
what I did read on that was that specifically children do not have the receptors because of their youth that are basically
Correct.
built over time as far as for adults. So it's just literally the physicality is impossible other than if it's a situation of a pre-existing condition and an underlying illness.
Right, because as we get older, our T cells go down, which is our helper cells. And in a child, their T cells are in the thousands, like 13, 14, 100. So, when you get older, you're lucky if your T cells are 7 or 800, which is, by the way, what the Oxford vaccine is helping people with, that has been discovered, that not only does it create the antibodies, but it also brings up your T cells in your body, which is your helper cells, your T4s and T8s. So it helps prevent the virus from ever developing in your system. But children have higher T cells than us people in our 50s and 60s, and of course 70s or 80s. So they're a lot stronger. Plus, also, you remember when we were kids, we used to have measles parties and stuff like that. Someone got it. Everybody go to that house. Everybody get it. Because we were building immunities. And that's what right now, a lot of kids not going to school, especially the poorer kids, they're not getting their vaccines that they need. So we're actually getting if they don't go back to school, we're getting our kids sicker. So this thing is very complicated. This thing is very complex. And what we need to do is we as Americans need to go out and vote. Do what Brooklyn did. If every community in America did what Brooklyn did, this is not in the news in a lot of places, but late Friday night, the city of Chicago, after the president got involved, they've decided we're not going to defund the police. Why? Because the rioters went into Miracle Mile and they were, destroying Miracle Mile. And the president said, I'm sending in troops and I'm sending in the police. And I'm sending this in. And you know what? Now the city of Chicago decided, we're not going to defund the police.
Well, what you're talking about in regards to defunding the police, that is so significant because now you have this, it's like spot fires going off all over across the United States. We have Portland, we have Seattle, and now there's a uprising here in Chicago, in DC. Whereas now you have $60 million worth of damage on Miracle Mile, and now they're changing the narrative from them rioting or looting because of George Floyd or because Black Lives Matter, but now it comes to reparations.
Well, you know what? The Black Lives Matter movement is a social communist movement created by Soros. And I want everybody to remember that Black Lives Matter did not start under this administration. It started under the Obama administration because of what happened in Missouri, where a boy, an 18-year-old boy, was shot dead by a cop. And yes, he was shot dead by a cop. And you know whose fault it was? It wasn't that cop's fault. It was the poor education that we've given, because you're an 18-year-old male, whether you're black or white, you're over 6 feet tall, and you have nothing to fall on. You have nothing to fall on. If the Black Lives Matter movement was real, okay, if it was real, it'd be looking at Chicago, where children, where young black men are killed every single weekend by other blacks who are part of the mob. If Black Lives Matter cared, they would be looking at the millions of children, black children, that are slaughtered every year by Planned Parenthood. Yet, if you look at the Democrats, they fund Planned Parenthood. And everybody needs to remember that Planned Parenthood was started to eliminate the black Americans. That's what Planned Parenthood started. So if that organization was worth it, hey, you and I, when I was working in New York this summer, you remember we were sitting on 60th Street at a very nice restaurant, and we were having a very nice lunch on a Saturday night, and here comes 1,000 people on bikes. Black Lives Matter, defund the police. There must have been 1,000 people riding those bikes.
It did take about 20 minutes for them to pass, absolutely.
Correct. And if I remember correctly, there might have been 3 out of that 1,000 that were black Americans. The rest were all white, young, kids that probably need to be slapped and probably didn't even know what they were talking about. And I remember...
But I do want you to comment about the people that were surrounded and seated eating that you had brought to my attention. You said, look what's going on here.
Yeah, it was very obvious. We had, if I remember correctly, there was like 5 black Americans, couples, sitting, eating. And I remember that they were looking at each other horrified. And it was like, oh my God, what are these people doing? And you had these white, crazy liberals with the cameras, shooting and going, yeah. And the African Americans, as we call them now, which is crazy because those people probably have never been to Africa. It's like calling me a Cuban American, where I lived in Cuba for 2 years, and thank God I got ripped out of that communist country. So I'm an American. I'm not a Cuban American. I'm an American. And they were looking at each other horrified, going, oh my God, what's going on here? And what I'm trying to say is that if these people really win, we're going to find that the black Americans, the gay Americans, the minorities like us, we're going to suffer the most, because that's what happened in Cuba. That's what happened in Cuba. And the biggest shame of all is that these people, and I've seen teachers in Chicago with the T-shirts of Che Guevara on them, red T-shirts with the face of Che Guevara, and every time I see that, I go, These people are clueless. Che Guevara, in his own words, in his own book, said that black people were worthless, that they were drunk, that they were worth half of what a white person was worth. And yet, these people wear the shirt of Che Guevara on their chest. When Obama went to Cuba, he sat under the portrait of Che Guevara. We are not teaching our kids, and this whole thing is a big scam. So
interesting what you're talking about, not teaching our children. I do want you to talk about and share your thoughts in regards to what currently our history and how that is being even taught to our students rather than that they don't know, which doesn't even exist. So in this situation where kids going back to school or homeschooling, and more parents are choosing to homeschool, but the question is, where is the curriculum that it's coming from too? Where are you getting your information, and how and where are you getting it taught to you and to our younger generation, if we can keep a republic for them to actually enjoy in the next 20 years?
and Gina, that is the biggest worry I have, because you know what, I am 60 years old, so I got another 20, 25 years to go, and by then, when I get 20 years from now, I'll be too old to fight. But I have to tell you that right now we have to fight for our kids, because depending on where you go to school is depending on what type of education you're getting. Like I said, when we had the problem in during the last administration, when Black Lives Matter showed up because of what happened in Missouri. You have an 18-year-old child. Because come on, 18, you're a child. Hell, my aunt, may she rest in peace, my aunt Isis used to say, you don't even know how to wipe your derriere until you're 30. Exactly. And you know what? She's right. She was absolutely dead on right. And you have you don't educate these kids. Like, I remember when I was on CNN Latino a couple of years ago, this girl said to me, oh, I have a degree in Chicano studies. And I looked at her here in California, and I said to her, what the hell is Chicano studies? And she got all insulted. I said, what are you going to do with a bachelor's degree in Chicano studies? What are you going to do with it? So we have allowed this stuff to go on for too many years. It depends on where you go to school. Yet your kids that go to your Wake Forest, your elite schools, they're getting a good education. They're learning the real stuff. They're the ones who are going to get a really good job. They're the ones who are going to run the industry. But the rest of these kids, like I said, they believe that Che Guevara was, and Evita Peron were fantastic, where they actually destroyed a country like Argentina, who was very prosperous.
Underscoring what you're just saying there, so then you're really looking at the separation of elite and the rich.
Yes.
And the entitled, separating and completely annihilating the middle class, because obviously the poor, or they're already taken care of by the state, and they would be the slave minions, so to speak. In this situation now, you're literally creating a swath down the center, removing the middle class, removing truly what the backbone of America is made of. And I understand, and I know other people are going to say, okay, well, we're definitely got to get to the polls to vote, because this is the fastest way to rectifying an end to this insanity. I think that we can all, I look at people's faces, I go, I think it's all BS, and they're like, we do too. So they're all saying it, we're all thinking it, but then we just have this box and this yellow journalism, William Randolph Hearst, Orwellian talking points that come back to that our president's disrespectful, so I'm going to vote for Biden and Harris. Bringing it back to that.
Right, and when you look at Biden, he's become extremely wealthy. No one can find his money. Think about this. Think about if you were able to get your kid a job that from China and from the Ukraine combined gave them, over $150,000 a month in income for sitting at home because you're the vice president's son. How fair is that? How fair is that to the child that went to school, that struggled, because hey, you and I were extremely poor when we were kids. We didn't know it because our parents kept us clean, and our parents sent us to school, and our parents worried about us, and our parents said, you got to do better. But how fair is that to the kids? I mean, look, Biden's son was, honestly, he was kicked out of the army, out of the armed forces, because of a cocaine problem. Biden's son turned around and married his dead brother's wife. I guess he wanted to be biblical, and take care of his wife, but he had to divorce his other one, and he had to not accept the child that he impregnated, pole dancer, which everybody knows that that's his kid because DNA nowadays. So here is Biden, who's become extremely wealthy because of his political. Here you have Kamala Harris, who her father has a problem with. Her father has a problem with the way she run things. And Kamala Harris, who, when it benefited her, she kept Black Americans in California in jail because it was politically correct for her to do to protect her friends. So all these people that talk about how important race is, it's crap. Biden, back then, I remember being a young kid sitting on the floor of 209 Washington Street, Hoboken, New Jersey, watching the news with my uncle. And my uncle was horrified when he heard a United States senator say he didn't want to send his kids to school with other kids because of color or, minorities, because he didn't want his kids going to a jungle school. And I remember my uncle looking at the family that was there, because we used to watch television as a family, and said, who the hell does this man think he is, calling us jungle?
It's absolutely horrifying. Absolutely, completely horrifying. And the more that we're able to place forward, but interestingly enough, the message isn't getting the true message back to Orwellian. Where do you go for your information? Because as listeners are truly scratching their heads and tearing their eyes out at this point because they're done with this entire COVID insanity. Where do you go to get your information? Because I'm interested in that.
I have to tell you that if this is going to come as shocking to you, because many years ago, as I said to you, I worked in Europe. I've done a lot of work in Europe. In fact, when Donald J. Trump went to Europe on D-Day to celebrate D-Day, I happened to have been there last year when he was there.
That's amazing. I watched that and I actually filmed it on my camera. On my own phone.
Well, I was there. I was working in Europe at the time. Actually, I was working in London. And I was observing what was going on in the commentaries from the UK papers. And let me say, the UK papers are not all fans of Donald Trump, and neither are the Europeans, because he's made the Europeans pay their fair share. I mean, we spend billions of dollars on their defense, and then they give business to other countries instead of to us, and they weren't paying their fair share. So there's not a lot of love there. But I will say that the Europeans, their media is still very much media. And I watched the media coverage of the president there. And like I said, I happened to be in London, and I was in the heart of London, and I saw the demonstrations that were against the president, and I saw the demonstrations that were in favor of the United States president. And I remember going back, because in Europe you can also see CNN. They don't have Fox, but you see CNN US. And I watched that night the coverage on CNN about the president. And you saw they talked about these massive demonstrations in London. Now remember, I'm there, I'm live. And I remember seeing these massive demonstrations against the president. There were maybe 50 people demonstrating against Donald J. Trump with Palestinian flags in the streets of London. But they never showed you the massive demonstrations of a couple of thousand British citizens with American and British flags praising the American president. They never showed you that. So I go to Europe a lot, I go actually to the UK, the Daily Mail, a lot. I go and I do searches that there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been taken down yet. I'm sure that Google and some of these other ones will take it down eventually. But I think that what you need to do is go and search, and especially with the New York Times, if you're going to read the New York Times, which by the way, I thought when I did my entrance exam into college, I read the New York Times every Sunday because that was the best way to get a high score on your college entrance exam because of the way they write. So you need to, if you're going to read the whole story, because usually they start with these propaganda headings, and then people, we Americans are lazy. If it's not within 30 seconds, 45 seconds, it's no good. So go in there and read the whole story, because they'll start with something at the top, and by the time at the end, they say, "But we told you the truth." No, you told us something at the top, and then at the bottom you told us the truth. So
in it about the fourth paragraph. I
yeah,
think also what happens is that, and I've done it myself, we end up just scrolling through headlines.
yeah,
And that, I think, when the headline says one thing, but then when you read into the meat of it, Donald Trump refers to it as the failing New York Times, but
mm-hmm.
you're and of course they're not very kind to him, and they tend to bash him first. So the idea is maybe perhaps read the article backwards, start from the end.
Yeah. Do it the Chinese way, Do it the Chinese way. Go backwards and read that way, because, like I said, it's really scary. But really, I think the U.S. Daily Mail. I mean, sorry, the UK Daily Mail. I think that Americans really need to look at what's going on, and you know what? No one is perfect, as Mama Dolores would say. The only people that everybody loves are the people made of gold. Since no one's made of gold, nobody's loved by everybody but gold. So, you know what? You've got to look at what's best for you. Do you want a country where you can say what you want, or do you want a country where you're going to be fearful? Do you want a country where your taxes could go up as high as 60%, which Biden and Kamala Harris have said they want to take us because they want to punish the industry? Just remember this. The reason our interest rates today are where they are is because President Donald J. Trump brought back trillions and trillions of dollars when he lowered the tax rates. People brought money back into the United States. So that's why our interest rates are so low. Tomorrow, you get Biden Harris, those trillions of dollars will leave the shores of the United States, and those interest rates and inflation rates will go through the roof.
So it really seems that in a balancing act, those are the two options. So once upon a time, people would look at it and say, no, I don't want to vote for higher taxes. And then the other people say, no, I'm going to vote for higher taxes. And also it's been said that, well, if you want to pay higher taxes, who's stopping you? You can always go ahead and pay more tax
Of course.
than you're entitled to, and you can direct to where it's going to rather than a mandate. So, interestingly enough, with everything that you had said and what you've presented, I really think that the Poppins report needs to have John Goya on a regular basis.
Oh, thank you.
I even think perhaps maybe we need to have a duo. I think you and I right now we need to reunite. Like if you're saying people are coming together, we need to reunite. I think we need to educate people, and I'd like you really to think seriously about having and doing a podcast that we can get the message out, because in less than 70 days, our nation can be a completely different landscape. So I think what
Yep.
we need to do is we need to make the rubber hit the road, because what you and I have talked about for an hour that started out thinking in one format is just too big and too important. And so maybe what we have the you know, the Poppins report and John Goya and the road to election day and making your voice count needs to happen.
Absolutely, Gina. And
I
whatever you need, I'm here for you.
well,
Because you know what? If we don't come together, we're going to lose this great republic.
well, as you said, I'd say I'm an American. You're an American. We're not Italian or Cuban American. We're not a black
absolutely.
American. We're not an African American or Chinese American. We're all Americans, and that's what
Hmm.
our family came here to America to become an
Hmm.
American, and it is our responsibility. And at this point, there's never been more higher stakes on the table, and this isn't just fluff. This is
Yeah,
really our Constitution, our republic, and our way of life as we know it that's at stake. So I thank you so much for this time because I have just been completely entrenched, like I know our listeners are, that it really has underscored your passion and more to my passion and to us being Americans and coming together. So thank you so much, John Goya, for participating today on the Poppins Report. And we are just going to go forward on this. And I've got my hand in as a proud American, and I know you do too.
absolutely. Thank you, Gina. And you have a wonderful Sunday and great speaking with you always.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. So.